Now for our roundtable, a busy time in Tallahassee as Florida lawmakers at work. Let's look at some of what's going on. Assault weapons. There was a push to get signatures to put an assault weapons ban on the ballot. It's not going to happen, not necessarily a surprise in this state, but nonetheless, your take, Mary Anna.
That's really unfortunate, especially considering Parkland, Pulse, really the list goes on, and I think that there needs to be some type of legislation passed on this. We saw them make swift action with Governor Scott with Parkland right after, and it seems like we've all forgotten.
Antonio, they say they'll try again in 2022, but in a state that is led by conservatives in Tallahassee, is it ever going to really be able to get traction?
I don't know, but what's really discouraging is you have Bill Gavano, the Senate president, conservative Republican, comes out and says an idea of extending background checks to gun sales at gun shows and flea markets. What is already law is just closing that loophole, and he has just gotten obliterated by a tweet from Donald Trump Jr., from Matt Gaetz. So if you're conservative, Florida president of the Florida Senate gets just absolutely annihilated on something that seems so basic, I don't think there's a lot of hope in the legislature for real meaningful gun safety measures.
Abortion and the parental consent bill waiting for approval. It would require those under 18 to have parental approval before getting an abortion. It's always an issue that brings out protesters on both sides of the equation. And as you look to November and the kind of issues that draw people to state races and people say, I'm going to remember that in November on both sides of that. Your thoughts on this bill?
They tried to pass a similar bill in 1989. It went before the state Supreme Court and they struck it down because it was unconstitutional. And I'll say it again, how about if we just stop having old men legislate women's uteruses?
Antonio?
I'm not going to argue with that, but I will say speaking this week, and you mentioned protesters, and I spoke to a single mom who said, my daughter goes to a school where if she needs to take an aspirin, I have to sign authorization, let them know she's got to take an aspirin. If she's got to go to a field trip, then I got to sign a waiver allowing her to go on this field trip. You're going to tell me that she can go get an abortion, which is an invasive medical procedure, and I'm not even going to be consulted on it? I'll leave it at that.
It's a slippery slope. The whole thing is a very slippery slope.
The debate goes on.
But it is a vote bait. It will get voters out there in November.
Teacher pay, proposed bill would boost minimum salaries, but the argument veteran teachers say, what about us? So where does this stand in the legislature right now with teachers?
Well, veteran teachers looks like they're going to get taken care of. The Senate just passed a proposal. There's a proposal that would give money for veteran teachers. What is really in debate is the $47,500 figure that Governor DeSantis has said that he wants. Starting teachers, that line. The Senate has put forward $400 million. DeSantis has said it would take $600 million. So there's a big $200 million gap to get to that $47,500 figure. And the reason the Senate is important here is because Galvano has been the one who has been most reticent to go that route because of, not because he's opposing teachers, but because he's looking ahead at projected, stalling of revenue coming into the state in coming years.
Well, we've seen a huge issue for parents and teachers who marched on Tallahassee. Climate change. The governor, we've talked about this over the past year, Office of Resiliency, even as chief science officer said sooner or later we're going to have to do something about carbon in the atmosphere. You didn't hear that in the Scott administration.
No, it's nice. I think that, as I've said before, we see that Governor DeSantis has the opportunity to become the Teddy Roosevelt of Florida. He's taking a total attack on environmental issues and focusing on that, and I think that's fantastic. And I love the bill that we see coming through, SB 7016, which is the statewide sea level rise task force. And I think we need to really focus on that because that's a huge issue with Florida and all of our coastlines.
Yeah,
go ahead.
If I can jump in. I think what you're really seeing here is within the Republican Party a generational gap. Because you look at Matt Gaetz, who has warned Republicans that we are running peril, they are running the peril of not focusing on climate change, really turning off younger voters. DeSantis is 40 years old, has 2 small children. There's a generational gap there.
And if the Republicans don't start focusing on climate crisis and climate change solutions, every Republican in a coastal city will continue to lose their elections to Democrats that are focusing on it.
Final note here on politics before we go to your closing comments. We have somebody you may recognize at home. He's up in the snows of New Hampshire talking about the history of Florida politicians from Reuben Askew to Bob Graham and others who couldn't make a go in New Hampshire. He's keeping an eye on things next week. Take a look. I think you'll recognize him.
And then, of course, we had 2016 where Former Governor Jeb Bush and sitting U.S. Senator Marco Rubio both gave it a shot, and their campaigns crumbled in New Hampshire. So it's a tough place for Floridians, but Florida's going to get its due on March 17th, right after Super Tuesday, because Florida most likely is going to have a very big impact on who the Democratic nominee is.
The snows of New Hampshire, your old colleague there, we're braving the weather in New Hampshire.
So much snow.
I know. Brian is actually keeping an eye. He'll be up there for the primary, so he'll keep an eye on things there for us. And New Hampshire will help talk about the momentum. And he talked about many a Florida campaign, when a failing in New Hampshire. It can help reshape opinions, and all of that will have a trickle effect for Florida. We thank you both for ably talking about that. Your closing comments in just a moment.
Okay, so I'll do the beach.